I slid open my late wife's jewelry box, expecting the soft gleam of her pearls, the quiet perfume of memory. Instead, a folded slip of paper lay on top, yellowed but deliberate, in her handwriting, "Don't trust your son." My throat tightened, the room shrinking as shadows stretched long across the floor. That single sentence weighed more than gold, more than grief, like a warning she had left for this very moment. What was my own blood plotting against me? Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where you're watching from right now. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The kettle hissed, steam rising in thin ribbons as I poured hot water into my chipped coffee mug. The morning sunlight fell across the kitchen table, catching the jewelry box where I had left it the night before. Its polished lid reflected the light like a small, private altar, my wife's memory preserved in wood and brass. I sat down, inhaling the bitter smell of coffee, telling myself that today would be quiet, manageable, maybe even kind. But small details refused to play along. My son entered the kitchen, heavy steps, his eyes not on me but on the refrigerator. He didn't greet me. He didn't even glance in my direction. Instead, his arm brushed the jewelry box as he reached across the table, shifting it an inch closer to the edge. "Watch it," I said quietly, steadying the box with my hand. He gave me a glance, short, dismissive. "Relax, Dad. It's just junk." Junk. The word hit harder than it should have. That box was the last piece of her I had, the last object she touched every night before bed. My coffee cooled as I stared at him, his back turned now, milk carton in hand, casual arrogance dripping from every movement. He poured himself a glass, left the carton on the counter, and without so much as a thank you, dropped into the chair opposite me. His phone lit up in his palm, blue glow painting his face. "You're wasting space here," he muttered, eyes never leaving the screen. The words sank in slowly, like poison dissolving in water. For a second, I wondered if I had misheard him. But no, the smirk tugging at his mouth told me he meant every syllable. I forced myself to breathe. "Excuse me?" He looked up finally, bored, irritated, as if my existence itself was a nuisance. "This house is too big for you alone. Don't you think it's time you did the right thing?" The right thing. I sipped my coffee, though it tasted like ash now. My wife's memory hovered in that box beside me, her presence reminding me to stay calm. She always hated when I lost my temper. "I built this house," I said evenly. "Every nail, every bill, every sacrifice. Don't tell me what's right." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "You're stuck in the past, Dad. Things change. People move on." His phone buzzed again, and with that, I became invisible to him once more. The silence between us swelled, thick and ugly. I stared at his hunched shoulders, at the boy I had raised, now a man, but hollow where his character should have been. The kettle clicked off behind me, forgotten. The house creaked as if unsettled by the weight of his words. I finished my coffee in silence, but every swallow burned. Later, as I cleared the table, my hand brushed against the jewelry box again. Its position was wrong, angled differently, as though it had been moved when I wasn't looking. I opened it, half expecting to see the note gone, but it was still there, folded neatly, tucked beneath the velvet lining. My heart slowed, but the unease remained. By afternoon, he had vanished into the yard, phone glued to his ear. I stayed inside, moving through my routine, watering plants, sorting the mail, but every glance at the box reminded me of his words: "Junk, wasting space, move on." That evening, as the sun dropped behind the trees, I passed through the kitchen one last time. The box was still there, but something was different. The lid wasn't flush anymore. It was tilted, slightly open, as if curious fingers had pried into it when I wasn't around. I froze, my breath sharp in my chest. I hadn't touched it since morning. Someone else had. The box wasn't where I left it. Someone had opened it. The next evening, the house felt colder than the September air drifting through the windows. I had set the jewelry box at the center of the dining table, as if my wife's presence could keep the peace. The wood gleamed under the light, steady and unyielding. But peace never came. Dinner began in silence, my son stabbing at his food, his wife tapping her fork like a clock counting down. Finally, she broke the rhythm with a laugh too sharp to be casual. "So, when are we moving into the master bedroom?" she asked, eyes sliding to me with something like mockery. My son smirked, chewing slowly before adding, "Yeah, Dad. You don't need all that space. You hardly use the house. Might be time you thought about what's best for everyone." I set my fork down. "This house is mine. It was your mother's too. And no one is moving anywhere." His chair screeched back slightly as he leaned forward. "You can't keep clinging to the past. Either sign the house over, or leave." The words landed heavier than thunder. The ultimatum wasn't a suggestion. It was a command, dressed up as concern. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "You think you can order me out of my own home?" My daughter-in-law snorted. "Old men don't need houses. They need nursing homes. Why fight the obvious?" The jewelry box sat between us, silent witness to their betrayal. My hand rested on its lid, steadying myself as the heat rose in my face. For a moment, I saw my wife across the table, her eyes wide with disappointment, not at me, but at them. I whispered, almost to myself, "She warned me." "What?" my son asked sharply. "Nothing." I lifted my gaze to his, letting the silence weigh. He didn't back down. "This is happening, Dad. One way or another." My appetite was gone. I rose from the table, chair legs scraping the floor, the jewelry box sliding an inch across the wood as if trying to follow me. "I won't forget this conversation," I said quietly. I left them at the table, their laughter resuming as though my dignity were a punchline. Outside, the air was sharp, clean, and cruel. The porch light flickered as I stepped onto the front walk. Across the street, my neighbor, Mrs. Harper, stood watering her flower beds. She gave me a cautious smile, then glanced toward my house. "You moving out, William?" she called softly, voice carrying just enough. I froze. "What did you hear?" She shrugged, almost apologetic. "Your son was talking this morning. Said the house was too much for you, that you'd be leaving soon." Her words stung worse than the ultimatum itself. It wasn't just in my home anymore, it was in the street, in the neighborhood, in the mouths of others. My shame was public property now. I nodded once, forcing civility. "People talk. Doesn't make it true." But even as I said it, I felt the lie in my bones. Back inside, the jewelry box still sat on the table, lid trembling from the draft of the door I had slammed. I pulled it closer, running my fingers over the brass clasp, as if it could offer comfort. Inside, the folded note remained. "Don't trust your son." The handwriting felt heavier now, prophetic, as though she had seen this night before it arrived. In the silence of the kitchen, I whispered to her memory, "I hear you." But outside, I knew the neighbors were already whispering too. And tomorrow, more would know. The walls of my own home no longer kept the humiliation contained. And for the first time, I wondered if the note was prophecy. The next morning began with an envelope in the mailbox, its edges bent as though even the postman had handled it reluctantly. I carried it inside, setting it on the kitchen table beside the jewelry box. For a moment, I hesitated, something in me already knew this wasn't ordinary mail. When I tore it open, my stomach dropped. A bank statement. Rows of numbers bleeding red, balances lower than they had any right to be. Transfers I hadn't made, withdrawals I hadn't authorized. My son's name appeared on the accounts, neatly typed as an authorized user. My hands shook, the paper rattling like dry leaves in the wind. He had already taken what wasn't his. I reached for the jewelry box, opening it with slow, deliberate care. Inside, the note rested like a heartbeat, her warning alive even now. I folded the bank statement into thirds and slipped it beneath the velvet lining, hiding it away. The box had become my vault, my last defense. When my son came into the room, I slid the lid shut. "Morning," he said, voice too casual. I held up the envelope. "Care to explain this?" He glanced at it, smirked. "Family needs, Dad. I just helped myself. You always said it's all for us anyway." That wasn't a gift, it was a theft. My voice cracked on the last word. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Don't be dramatic. It's still in the family." His wife entered just then, smirking as she caught the tail end. "He's right. What's yours is ours. Isn't that how families work?" I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles went white. Families ask. Families respect. They don't steal. My son shrugged. "Call it what you want. The accounts are already in motion. Too late now." The jewelry box sat between us on the table, silent, shining in the morning light. My wife's handwriting inside, my hidden proof, my only ally left in this house. Later that day, I stepped outside for air. The street seemed smaller, suffocating. Across the way, Mrs. Harper was already speaking to another neighbor, their voices low but their glances sharp. As I passed, their conversation stopped mid-sentence. One of them shifted, whispering something I couldn't quite catch, just the word money flickering like a spark in the silence. I walked on, but the weight of it followed me. That evening, I caught a glimpse of something worse. Through the window, as the sun fell low, I saw my son standing in the bank parking lot. He wasn't alone. Beside him, leaning close, was Mr. Patterson, the town's branch manager. They spoke in hushed tones, Patterson nodding, my son's hands gesturing too eagerly. The jewelry box burned in my thoughts. I hurried inside, pulling it from its place, opening it just to see the note, the folded bank statement pressed tight against it. My proof. My reminder. I whispered into the stillness of the room, "They won't take this from me. Not yet." But outside, the deals were already being made. And if my wife's warning was true, the worst was still to come. He sees son whispering with banker in parking lot. If you're still here, don't forget to subscribe, and comment your thoughts. I barely slept that night. The jewelry box rested on my nightstand, its brass clasp catching every flicker of moonlight, as though keeping watch with me. I had tucked the bank statement beneath the folded note, sealing both inside like a promise to myself. But the house did not rest. Its walls carried whispers. Its floors trembled under unfamiliar footsteps. By morning, I sensed something wrong the moment I entered the living room. The box wasn't where I had left it. It sat on the coffee table now, lid wide open, velvet lining exposed to air. I froze. Who touched this? My voice was low, but it carried. From the kitchen, my daughter-in-law called back, too sweetly, "Relax, it's just a box. We needed coasters for our drinks last night, and it was sitting there. Don't be so precious." Coasters. She had set glasses on my wife's last memory, as if it were furniture. I closed the lid slowly, my fingers trembling, my chest burning with a quiet rage. Inside, the folded note pressed against the stolen bank statement, their weight heavier than wood. My wife's warning echoed louder than ever. That evening, I moved through the hall quietly, drawn by the sound of muffled voices. My son's office door was cracked open, just enough to let the words slip through. "If we get his signature, the deed is ours," my son whispered. "And if he refuses?" his wife asked, her tone sharp. "Then we forge it. Patterson said he can make it stick." My heart clenched. Patterson, the banker I had seen him with. So this was the plan. Not just theft from my account, but theft of the very roof over my head. I leaned closer, every muscle taut, forcing myself to breathe silently. Don't worry, my son continued. He's old, confused. No one will question it. Her laugh was cold, brittle. Then soon, this house will be ours, not his little shrine. The jewelry box. My shrine. I stepped back from the door, pulse hammering. Every board in the hallway creaked like an alarm bell, but they didn't hear me. Their plotting filled the air too thickly for anything else to matter. Later, I returned to my room and set the jewelry box on the desk. I opened it with deliberate care, as though afraid their hands had contaminated it. The note was still there, my wife's last warning, folded neatly as before. But the box no longer felt safe. Its sanctity had been violated, its purpose mocked. I ran my hand along its edges, whispering to her memory. You were right. I should have listened sooner. The weight of humiliation pressed down harder than ever, but beneath it stirred something else, resolve. If they thought I was blind, if they thought I was weak, they were wrong. They hadn't noticed me listening. They hadn't seen me watching. And that mistake would cost them dearly. They thought I was blind. But I was watching. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of old books and polished wood, the kind of place where truth should carry weight. But the moment I stepped inside with my son and his wife, I felt the trap closing. The jewelry box was in my bag, tucked carefully between documents, a silent guardian traveling with me. Mr. Turner, the lawyer said, standing to greet us. His voice was professional, but his eyes flickered with unease when he glanced at my son. We'll just need your father's signature here, my son interrupted, placing a folder on the desk before the man could even sit. His tone was brisk, rehearsed, as though I had already agreed. I leaned over the folder. The document's title read like a knife pressed to my throat, Transfer of Deed. I steadied my breath. You expect me to sign this? My daughter-in-law crossed her legs with a smirk. It's the smart move. Less hassle for everyone. Think of it as, simplifying things. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, his discomfort growing. Mr. Turner, do you understand this would place ownership solely under your son's name? I understand perfectly, I replied, my voice low. And I'm not signing. The air tightened. My son forced a smile, though his jaw pulsed. Dad, don't make this difficult. Everyone knows you can't manage all this anymore. It's time. I glanced at the jewelry box in my bag, my wife's warning echoing. I could almost hear her voice whispering in the hush of the office, protect what's yours. I built that house, I said. It's not yours to take. The silence cracked when the secretary entered, arms full of files. She paused, sensing the tension, her gaze moving between us. My son's voice rose despite himself. Do you want to end up homeless, old man? You'll sign, one way or another. The secretary froze, the files shifting in her arms. Behind her, two clients waiting in the reception area looked up sharply. Their eyes lingered on me, sympathy in one, disgust in another, before cutting toward my son. The lawyer cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable now that the room was no longer private. I must remind you, he said carefully, that coercion in property matters can have consequences. My daughter-in-law rolled her eyes. He's being dramatic. He wants to sign, he just needs a push. But the murmurs in the waiting area grew louder, whispers carrying through the open doorway. One man muttered, not quietly enough, forcing your own father? That's low. Heat crawled up my son's neck, but he pressed the folder closer to me, pen sliding across the desk. Do it, he hissed. I stood slowly, my chair legs scraping against the hardwood. My hand brushed against the jewelry box in my bag, grounding me, reminding me of the note inside. My wife had seen this day coming, and she had armed me with warning. No, I said simply. The room stilled. Even the secretary's breath caught. I pushed the folder back across the desk. I'm leaving. My son muttered something under his breath, but I didn't care. The murmurs followed me into the reception area, where eyes tracked my steps, some pitying, others quietly approving. One older woman leaned to the secretary and whispered, "He doesn't deserve that treatment." And for the first time, their shame wasn't mine to carry. It was theirs. Outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner. I stepped onto the street, the jewelry box heavy at my side. The note inside seemed to pulse with vindication. They thought they had cornered me. But the truth had slipped out in public now, and whispers spread faster than signatures. Father leaves without signing, faces pale, silence heavy. The motel room was small, but it felt larger than my house had in weeks. The silence was mine. The air was mine. Even the thin mattress seemed to hold me with more respect than my own blood. On the nightstand sat the jewelry box, lid closed, brass clasp catching the pale glow of the lamp. For the first time, it didn't feel like a coffin of grief, it felt like an ally. By dawn, I was already awake, the hum of the motel fridge filling the room as I spread papers across the desk. Bank statements, insurance records, credit accounts, all of it laid out like maps before a general. The jewelry box sat at the corner, steady and watchful. I picked up my phone, dialed the bank. My voice was calm, measured, while inside, every word felt like steel. "Yes, this is William Turner. I need to remove an authorized user from my accounts immediately." The representative confirmed, clicking away at her keyboard. "All right, sir. Your son's access has been terminated." A breath escaped me, sharp and long. The jewelry box gleamed in the corner, as though it too exhaled relief. Next came the mortgage. My son had leaned on my home as if it were already his. That arrogance ended now. I logged into the portal, my finger hovering over the "Cancel Autopay" button. One simple click, and their safety net would vanish. The sound of the keypress echoed in the room, louder than thunder. I whispered, "That's one." By mid-morning, I was on the phone again, this time with the insurance company. "Yes, I need to cancel the policy tied to my vehicles. Effective immediately." The agent hesitated. "Are you sure, Mr. Turner? This will leave." "I'm sure," I cut in. "Remove every name except mine." The jewelry box glinted, as if nodding approval. When the confirmation email landed, I tapped the screen with deliberate care. Another weight lifted. Another chain snapped. That's two. The final strike was quieter, but no less sharp. The grocery transfers, the monthly deposits I'd been making into their account for years, long after they were capable of standing on their own. Every week I had shouldered their needs, believing it was love. But love had been twisted into obligation, and obligation into abuse. Not anymore. I ended the transfer with 3 clicks. My hands were steady now, my heart slower, colder. That's 3. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the papers scattered like the aftermath of battle. The jewelry box caught the light, reflecting a small golden glow across the documents. For years it had been nothing but a memory. Now it was a weapon, her voice reminding me to act. For the first time in years, my account balance belonged only to me. I poured myself motel coffee, bitter and stale, but tonight it tasted different. It tasted free. I knew what would come next. By nightfall, their phones would buzz. Their bills would bounce. Their anger would flare. And when it did, my silence would answer louder than any shouting match ever could. I touched the jewelry box gently, whispering to my wife's memory, "I'm not bending anymore." By morning, their phones would scream louder than my silence. "Tell me, what would you do in this situation? I'd love to know." By Wednesday, my phone showed 12 missed calls. By Friday, there were 22. Each voicemail told the story better than any novel could: anger, denial, fear, and finally, desperation. The first was my son, voice sharp with rage. "What the hell did you do? The mortgage bounced. The bank's calling me, and it's in your name. Fix it." The second was his wife, shrill and venomous. "You can't just cut us off. We have bills, we have lives. You think you can control us with money? We'll make sure people know what you really are." But by the fifth message, the tone shifted. It was my daughter's voice, soft, trembling. "Dad, please. I don't know what's happening. The insurance was cancelled, and Harry's furious. Just talk to me. Please." I sat in the quiet of my motel room, lamp buzzing, the jewelry box on the dresser beside me. Each time I played a voicemail, my eyes drifted toward it. The box didn't move, didn't flinch. It reminded me of her, of steadiness, of warnings I had ignored too long. By the weekend, their desperation grew teeth. Another message from my son: "If you don't fix this, Dad, we'll call the police. You think cutting us off makes you powerful? It makes you cruel. They'll believe us, you're old, confused. They'll take my word over yours." I deleted it without hesitation. Then another, my daughter again, voice cracking like thin glass. "Please. We can't cover groceries. I didn't know he was taking so much from you. Dad, I swear, I didn't know. I let that one play twice before deleting it too." Her guilt was seeping through, but I wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. Out in the world, whispers were already forming. At the diner down the street, I overheard a conversation between two men at the counter. Heard William finally cut them off. About time. He carried them for years. I sipped my coffee quietly, the jewelry box safe back at the motel, its presence lingering like a shadow even when not in sight. Dignity, once buried, was starting to resurface. By Monday, the calls turned frantic. 29 missed calls. 11 new voicemails. "Dad, the car insurance lapsed, they won't even let us drive. Old man, you'll regret this. You're destroying your own family. Dad, please. I can't sleep. He's shouting every night. I just need to know you're okay." Each message stacked on the last, a tower of their unraveling. And I sat calmly in my chair, deleting them one by one, sipping lukewarm motel coffee as though it were victory wine. On Tuesday evening, the inevitable happened. A knock at the motel door. Sharp, insistent, rattling the thin frame. My chest tightened as I rose, walking slowly to the peephole. Outside stood shadows, two figures, one taller, one smaller, both too familiar. Their postures screamed of desperation, of lives slipping through their fingers. I didn't open the door. Not yet. I watched them through the glass, the jewelry box safe on my desk behind me, the warning inside whispering louder than the pounding fists. My son's muffled voice carried through the door. "Open up, old man. We need to talk." And my daughter's softer plea followed: "Dad, please. I just want to understand." I stepped back into the room, pulse steady. The jewelry box gleamed in the dim motel light, as if waiting for my decision. Knock at motel door, shadows outside. The pounding on the motel door grew sharper, rattling the thin frame like it might splinter. I stood motionless, the jewelry box steady on the desk behind me, its brass clasp gleaming in the dim lamplight. Their voices bled through the wood: anger, fear, desperation. "Open the damn door," my son barked. "Dad, please, just talk to us," my daughter's voice cracked, fragile as glass. I drew a breath, steady, then turned the lock. The door creaked open just enough for me to step into the hall. The fluorescent light painted the narrow corridor a sickly yellow, shadows stretching long behind them. My son pushed forward first, his jaw tight, fists balled. His wife lingered behind, her eyes sharp, scanning the room as though already cataloging what could be taken. My daughter hovered near the back, gaze fixed on the floor. "Look at you," my son sneered. "Hiding in a motel like some runaway. You think this makes you strong?" I folded my arms across my chest. "Stronger than being a thief in my own home." His nostrils flared, but before he could answer, the motel manager appeared at the far end of the hall. A wiry man with a mop in one hand, he paused, curiosity flickering across his face. His eyes lingered, sensing tension. "Everything all right here?" he asked. My son forced a smile. "Family disagreement. Nothing to worry about." But the manager didn't move on. He leaned on his mop, watching, listening. Behind him, a door cracked open and a guest peeked out, interest lighting her face. The audience was forming. My son stepped closer, lowering his voice but not his fury. "You're making a mistake. Patterson told me the loan didn't go through because you pulled funding. You embarrassed me. Do you have any idea how that looks?" My blood ran cold. Patterson, the banker. The loan. So it was true. They hadn't just drained my accounts. They had tried to secure a loan against my property. Without me. I let the silence hang heavy before answering. "You mean the forged loan?" His face faltered, color draining. "What are you talking about?" I leaned closer, keeping my voice firm. "Don't lie to me. I know you tried to put my name on papers I never signed." The words rippled down the hallway. The motel manager's brows rose. The woman in the doorway gasped softly, retreating to whisper to someone inside. Even my daughter lifted her head now, confusion clouding her eyes. "You did what?" she asked, staring at her brother. "Nothing," he snapped. "Don't listen to him. He's old, confused." "Confused?" My voice cut sharper than a blade. "I've lived long enough to recognize fraud. I know exactly what you planned." My daughter-in-law finally stepped forward, venom in her tone. "This is ridiculous. Nobody will believe you." But even as she spoke, the motel manager raised a hand. "Actually," he said slowly, "I've heard enough. Maybe it's not my business, but forging loans? That's a crime." My son's head snapped toward him, rage rising, but the damage was done. The whispers spread faster than fire. Doors opened farther down the hall. A couple with a toddler stared openly. Another man leaned against the frame of his door, smirking at the scene. Every pair of eyes weighed down on my son. On his wife. And suddenly, their shame was no longer private. I turned and stepped back into my room, returning to the desk. The jewelry box sat in the lamplight, waiting. I opened it slowly, revealing the folded note and the bank statement pressed beneath. Proof. Warning. Evidence. I didn't pull them out, not yet. But I let my son see the motion, let him watch the way my hand lingered on the papers inside. His eyes narrowed, realization dawning that I wasn't unarmed. "You're finished," I said quietly, the weight of my wife's handwriting heavy between us. His voice faltered. "This isn't over." "No," I replied. "It's only beginning." As they turned to leave, the whispers followed them down the hall. Stealing from his father? Forgery? Disgusting. Each word clung to them like smoke they couldn't wash off. My daughter lingered behind, her eyes meeting mine for a fleeting moment, confusion, regret, something softer breaking through. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. When the hallway finally emptied, I closed the jewelry box with a sharp click, the sound like a gavel sealing judgment. His last words weren't a threat, they were a promise. "Stay with me, because what happens next will shock you even more." By morning, I knew what had to be done. The jewelry box rested in my hands as I left the motel, its weight heavier than any suitcase. Inside were the folded note, the bank statement, and now my resolve. What had once held memories was now a container of weapons. The courthouse smelled of dust and old carpet, sunlight streaming through narrow windows like judgment itself. I walked the halls slowly, the box tucked beneath my arm, as if carrying my wife's spirit beside me. At the clerk's desk, I set it down gently, pulling free the papers I had hidden beneath the velvet lining. "I need to file an eviction," I said, voice steady. "And a restraining order." The clerk glanced up, surprised at my calm tone. "Against who, sir?" "My own son," I answered. The words tasted bitter, but they carried no hesitation. She nodded, sliding forms toward me. The sound of the pen scratching across paper was sharp, final, like a blade slicing through chains that had bound me for years. Each signature wasn't just ink. It was a declaration, no more. Later, I sat across from the sheriff, his badge catching the light. The jewelry box rested on his desk between us, its lid closed, brass gleaming. He listened as I explained, the theft, the bank transfers, the attempted forgery. I slid the bank statement forward, then tapped the folded note but didn't unfold it. Some things remained private, sacred, even in war. The sheriff's jaw tightened as he read. "You've got enough here to make this official. I'll serve the eviction notice myself." For the first time in weeks, my lungs filled fully. "Thank you." He leaned forward. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself for not letting them walk all over you. Most men your age, they just give in." I placed a hand on the jewelry box. I promised her I wouldn't. That afternoon, I returned to the motel. The box sat open on the desk, sunlight cutting across the velvet lining, glowing over the folded note. I stared at it for a long time, remembering the laughter that once filled my house, the warmth that used to live within its walls. Now those walls would be reclaimed. My phone buzzed again, another message, my son this time, his voice a mix of rage and desperation. "You think you can kick us out? You're out of your mind. This is our house now. You won't win." I deleted it without reply. Because I had already won. The sheriff had set the date. That evening, I walked past the diner. Through the glass, I saw faces turn toward me. Conversations hushed. A man whispered, "That's him. He's fighting back." The jewelry box was tucked beneath my arm, invisible to them, but its presence seemed to ripple outward, demanding respect. For the first time in too long, the whispers weren't pitying. They carried something else. Admiration. Back in the motel, I poured stale coffee, raising the cup in a silent toast to the box. "This is only the beginning," I murmured. Sheriff sets date for serving papers. The sheriff kept his word. By the end of the week, the notice had been served. My son's bravado cracked the moment the paper hit his hands, though he tried to mask it with laughter. But I heard the quiver beneath. Within days, the first cracks appeared. Creditors began calling, no longer redirected to me. I sat in the motel, the jewelry box steady on the dresser, listening to voicemail after voicemail they had mistakenly left on the shared line. "Mr. Turner, this is Capital Loans. Your payment is overdue. Immediate action is required. This is the third attempt to reach you regarding your balance." Each message was a nail in the coffin of his facade. At the diner one morning, I overheard two men at the counter. Harry's credits shot, one whispered. He tried to open a new line and got denied. "Serves him right," the other muttered. "After what he pulled with his old man." The whispers weren't pity anymore. They were ridicule. I stirred my coffee slowly, the jewelry box at my side, as if my wife's memory was listening too. She had always said truth defends itself. Now, it was happening before my eyes. But humiliation didn't stop at money. 2 days later, word spread that his own relatives, his wife's parents, had cut them off. I heard it from Mrs. Harper, who approached me on the sidewalk with her usual half-whispered gossip. They showed up at her parents' door, she said, voice tinged with delight. And were turned away. Flat out refused. Can you imagine? I could imagine. And I savored it. But the cruelest blow came the next morning, when my daughter called, not to me, but overheard as she argued outside the motel with her husband. They expelled Emma from school, Harry. The tuition wasn't paid. My parents are calling me, asking what happened. Do you know how humiliating this is? Her voice cracked, echoing down the thin motel walls. My granddaughter, dragged into this mess because of their greed. I sat inside, the jewelry box open before me, the folded note catching the light. My wife's words, "Don't trust your son." Now I saw their ripple effect, every lie, every theft spreading outwards, hurting even the innocent. That evening, my daughter came to me alone. No husband at her side, no smirk in her voice. She knocked softly, almost ashamed to disturb me. When I opened the door, she didn't step inside at first. Her eyes were swollen, her voice small. "Dad, he lied to me too." The words nearly buckled my knees. I motioned her in, but she lingered at the threshold like a penitent child. "I didn't know about the accounts. Or the loan. He told me everything was handled, that you wanted it that way." I swear, I didn't know. I studied her face, the same eyes her mother once had, but clouded with guilt. On the desk behind me, the jewelry box sat open, its warning visible. I gestured toward it. She told me not to trust him. I should have listened sooner. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry." Her apology hung heavy, raw, but forgiveness was still too far away. Later, alone again, I closed the jewelry box with deliberate care. The clasp clicked shut, the sound echoing like judgment in the stillness of the room. Their facade was crumbling. Their allies were gone. Their dignity had collapsed. And it wasn't over yet. Daughter whispers, "Dad, he lied to me too." Sunday morning, the church bell tolled across town, low and steady, summoning people to gather. I hadn't planned to go. But something inside me stirred, a need to stand where whispers turned into truths. I tucked the jewelry box beneath my arm and walked into the sanctuary, its brass clasp catching the sun through stained glass windows. Heads turned as I entered. Some nodded in respect. Others looked away quickly, embarrassed by what they'd heard. I took my seat near the aisle, the box resting on my lap, heavy but steady. The sermon began, but the real noise wasn't the pastor's words, it was the whispers threading through the pews. "Harry's out of work. They lost the car. Did you hear? His own father evicted him." I sat still, eyes forward, letting the words flow over me. For the first time, I wasn't their target. I was their witness. When the service ended, the pastor stopped me at the door. His voice was gentle but firm. "William, truth defends itself. You don't need to carry this burden alone." I touched the jewelry box. "I'm not." She warned me. "Now, I'm listening." That afternoon, I stopped at the diner for coffee. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, and conversation faltered just slightly. The place was packed, families at booths, men at the counter, teenagers crowded around milkshakes. But their eyes followed me. At first, it was quiet glances. Then a voice carried, unashamed. "That's him, the father who cut them off." Another voice answered, sharper. "Good. About time someone held Harry accountable." Laughter rippled, low but undeniable. I took a seat at the counter, placing the jewelry box carefully beside me. The waitress, kind-eyed and hushed, poured my coffee. She leaned closer, whispering, "You did the right thing." Everyone knows it now. From a booth behind me, my daughter-in-law's voice pierced the air. I hadn't noticed her when I came in, but there she was, alone, nursing a cup of cold tea. "You think you've won, don't you?" she hissed. "You've humiliated us. Do you know what people are saying? Do you know what it feels like to be laughed at in your own town?" I didn't turn around. I sipped my coffee, steady and calm. "It feels," I said quietly, "like justice." The diner hushed, every ear tilting toward our exchange. The jewelry box sat bright on the counter, catching the neon light from the sign outside. For years, it had been a private relic. Today, it was a public shield. She rose abruptly, chair legs scraping, muttering curses as she stormed out. The bell above the door jangled violently, then silence followed. When I glanced around, the faces watching me weren't mocking. They weren't pitying. They were approving. One man at the counter lifted his cup in a toast. A woman near the window smiled faintly. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a victim in their eyes. I felt like a man reclaiming what was his. That night, back at the motel, I placed the jewelry box on the table and opened it. The note lay inside, her handwriting steady, the warning fulfilled. "All eyes were on me," I whispered. And I wasn't afraid anymore. All eyes were on me. And I wasn't afraid anymore. The bank smelled of ink and cold air, the kind of place where trust was meant to live, but trust had died here long ago. I walked in with the jewelry box under my arm, its weight heavier than the marble floor beneath me. The teller glanced up, surprised at the sight of me carrying something so out of place, but I kept moving until I reached the manager's office. Patterson sat behind his desk, tie loosened, eyes darting when he saw me. He straightened quickly, a rehearsed smile sliding into place. "Mr. Turner. What can I do for you today?" I set the jewelry box down on his desk, the brass clasp glinting under the fluorescent lights. Slowly, deliberately, I opened it. Inside lay the folded note, the bank statement, and now, the forged deed I had obtained from the lawyer. His face drained of color. "You recognize this, don't you?" I asked, sliding the paper toward him. He cleared his throat, stammering. "That, appears to be forgery," I cut in. "You facilitated it. My son tried to put my name on a loan I never signed. And you helped." The word struck harder than any blow. His hands twitched, searching for a defense, but the silence between us was louder than excuses. "I could take this straight to the authorities," I continued, "and I still might. But today, I came for something else. I came for proof. And now, I have it." He shifted uneasily, beads of sweat forming at his temple. "Mr. Turner, perhaps we can resolve this quietly." I leaned forward, my hand resting on the jewelry box. "Quietly? You mean the way you and my son hoped to steal my home?" The door creaked open. A clerk stood there, eyes wide, having overheard enough to know. Behind him, a customer in line glanced curiously toward us. Whispers again. Always whispers. And soon, they would spread. I smiled faintly. "No, Mr. Patterson. There will be nothing quiet about this." Later, in the lawyer's office, I laid the forged deed across his desk. The jewelry box sat open beside it, its contents spilling like ammunition: statement, note, forgery. The lawyer examined the document, shaking his head slowly. "This is serious. With this, we can file charges. At the very least, it secures your case in court." I nodded. That's all I needed. The jewelry box, once her keepsake, was now a war chest, its velvet lining holding not jewels but justice. That evening, back at the motel, I poured myself a drink and stared at the box on the table. For weeks it had felt like a burden, a reminder of betrayal. Tonight, it felt different. Tonight, it was victory. I lifted the forged deed, folded it carefully, and tucked it back inside. It didn't belong to me. It belonged to the story of their downfall. "This ends with law," I whispered to the empty room. And I meant it. He sets box on lawyer's desk, war chest ready. The courtroom was colder than stone, the kind of place where words could build or break a man's life. I walked in carrying the jewelry box against my chest, its brass clasp gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Every step echoed, each one steady, deliberate. On the other side of the aisle sat my son and his wife. Their faces were pale, their postures stiff. Their lawyer whispered urgently, but their eyes betrayed panic. My daughter sat behind them, shoulders slumped, her gaze fixed on the floor. The judge cleared his throat, papers shuffling. "Mr. Turner, you may present your evidence." I placed the jewelry box on the table with a hollow thud. The sound silenced the room. Slowly, I opened it. Inside lay everything: my wife's note, the stolen bank statement, the forged deed. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. I lifted the note first. This was my wife's last message to me. "Don't trust your son." My voice didn't shake. It rang steady, louder than it had in months. Then the bank statement. "Here is proof of unauthorized withdrawals, transfers I never approved." Finally, the forged deed. I held it up, the paper trembling not from my hands but from the weight of its lies. And here is the clearest betrayal of all, an attempt to steal the very home I built with my wife. The judge's brow furrowed, lips pressed thin. The silence that followed was suffocating. My son shot to his feet. "Dad, please. You don't understand. It was never meant to go this far." His voice cracked, desperate. His wife tugged at his sleeve, but her face twisted with rage. "He's lying. He's framing us." But the forged deed on the table said otherwise. The jewelry box sat open, its velvet interior glowing like a spotlight of truth. The judge turned his gaze toward them. "This is serious. Fraud, coercion, elder abuse. Do you have any defense?" For the first time, my son's bravado vanished completely. His shoulders sagged. His voice lowered to a plea. "Dad, please. Don't ruin us. We made mistakes, but we're family." The irony hit like thunder. Family. They had used that word to justify theft, humiliation, betrayal. Now they wielded it as a shield. I stood slowly, my hand resting on the jewelry box. My eyes locked on my son's. "She warned me about you," I said coldly, my voice carrying through the chamber. "And she was right." Gasps filled the room again. My daughter buried her face in her hands. My son slumped back into his chair, defeated. His wife cursed under her breath, but the venom had no power anymore. The judge nodded toward the bailiff. "Proceed." The sheriff moved forward, cuffs in hand, his boots echoing like hammers of justice. My son's eyes widened, panic returning. "Dad, wait," he shouted. "Don't let them do this. Please, I'll change, I'll fix everything." But I didn't flinch. I kept my hand on the jewelry box, fingers brushing the note, steady as stone. The bailiff snapped the cuffs shut. The sound was final, like a door closing on a chapter that should have ended long ago. I sat back down, exhaling slowly. The jewelry box remained open, the truth displayed for all to see. For the first time, I felt the weight of my wife's warning lift. Not because it was over, but because I had finally listened. Sheriff approaches SIL with cuffs. The sound of the cuffs echoed through the courtroom like the toll of a bell. My son stumbled as the sheriff pulled him to his feet, his eyes wild with panic. His wife shouted protests that rang hollow against the gavel's command for silence. And then, for the first time in months, the eyes of the town were not filled with pity for me. They were filled with judgment for them. A murmur rippled through the benches. Someone whispered, "He betrayed his own father." Another voice answered, "And now he pays for it." The judge banged his gavel again, but the murmurs did not die. They grew, swelling into a wave of whispers that carried truth from mouth to mouth. I sat still at the table, the jewelry box open before me, its contents gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The note, the statement, the forged deed, they weren't just evidence anymore. They were my wife's voice, my dignity, my shield. When the sheriff led my son down the aisle, a strange thing happened. People began to rise, not to leave, but to stand. One by one, they got to their feet, as though acknowledging something larger than the case. A reckoning. Soft clapping broke the silence. It grew louder, spreading through the room until the chamber itself seemed to breathe with it. Applause. Not for me alone, but for the truth finally spoken aloud. My daughter wept quietly in the back, shoulders shaking. She didn't clap. She didn't have to. Her silence was apology enough. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun was blinding, but it felt different than before. Warm, not harsh. The town stood waiting, neighbors, acquaintances, even strangers who had heard the whispers and come to see the outcome. Their gazes weren't filled with pity anymore. They carried something else. Respect. Mrs. Harper stepped forward, voice low but proud. "You did what none of us thought possible, William. You stood up to your own blood." I nodded, clutching the jewelry box tighter. I did what she asked of me. The pastor came next, shaking my hand firmly. "Your dignity has been restored. And with it, your home." Behind us, a reporter scribbled notes. By morning, the newspaper would carry the headline across town, "Father stands tall against betrayal." That evening, back in the motel room for the last time, I placed the jewelry box on the table. The clasp was warm under my fingers, as though it carried the memory of everything it had held. Slowly, I closed the lid. The click echoed in the quiet room, not like judgment this time, but like peace. I traced the grain of the wood one final time. It had been a warning, a vault, a weapon, and finally a shield. Now, it was simply what it had always been, hers. The next day, I returned home. Alone, but not defeated. The house was quiet, waiting for me. I set the jewelry box on the mantel, where the sunlight hit it just right, and whispered. "Family isn't blood, it's respect. And dignity is the inheritance I chose to keep." If you liked this story, like the video, subscribe, and share your impressions in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left.